Have you noticed that almost like every weekend here they have some sort of charitable 6K run or a walk for something to raise money or in tribute to some Parkinson's disease or Grover's syndrome? Well, it's all these people got in their fellowship, and they have bands and entertainment, and they never have anything that would fit most of us, like severe dandruff or innate ugliness. Oh, are we on? Oh, the news. One man believed that he had an illness which kept him from being able to function at his highest potential. After a number of years of strenuous study of the matter, he began to suspect that what was really holding him back was his belief that he had an illness. If you think you have a rash, it's hard as hell not to look at it. One guy thought, I ain't much, but damn, I'm all I've got. I hope it's enough. We received the following letter. I do not usually watch your show, but my wife tells me that you recently called cookbooks pornography for the stomach, which leads me to believe that you were once a professional wrestler. Am I correct? Yours, Mr. R.C. Bly, etc. The unstated, unnoticed, but undeniable operational approach of ordinary minds is to criticize man until he becomes comprehensible. And no, I will not play Mr. Smartass and opine as to how many more thousands of years men will pursue such a course before recognizing its, shall we say, rather substantial lack of success. But see, that'd just throw us into the same condemnation hopper with everyone else, wouldn't it? Not necessarily. But it would bring into blunt relief the reality of how the routine mind can hear nothing being of any consequence unless it is in some way critical. Science itself seems based thereon, as does man's technological and social progress in general. But the overall route collective man's march is always taking is not for sure the only one available. There are side streets, shortcuts, and unpaved paths on which an individual may strike out on his own. And when he does, he can then look back at the collective trek and see clearly that it can move only in the manner proper for it, and that thus all criticism of it arising from within its own ranks is ill-founded due to those offering such lacking an objective viewing position. Looking up from his notes into the face of the class, the professor said, all in all, let me say this. Cutting a frog up into smaller and smaller pieces will never afford the same understanding of it as will the study of a live one and a student suddenly interrupted by saying, Honorable instructor, would we be not better served if, instead of dwelling on well-known metaphors concerning pickle reptiles, you spoke to us of the sterility of words dissecting words and cliched thinking attempting analyzation of its predecessor's residue. The professor was caught completely off guard and pleasantly surprised by the remark, but was loath to respond in a truthful manner in that he could presently not afford to lose his job. After concluding that what was seen on commercial television was a fair reflection of the contemporaneous interest in collective mental life of man, one guy then attempted to divide the programming into some general categories and came up with the following. He decided that all the shows were either about sports or politics, which he saw as sports for the mind, or soap operas, which included all so-called news, comedy, and religious programs. He returned to this list over a considerable length of time and would periodically threaten to add to it, or at least slightly enlarge one of its categories, but would always return to a position wherein his original view of it seemed entirely adequate. What do you think? A cosmic tale. There was once a planet filled with boats, but which wanted them to sail faster and more efficiently, so it put imaginary captains at their helms. Now right here I've got to point out to you how translating the language of one world to another one always is imperfect, and specifically in this instance of saying imaginary captains were placed on the ships. Imaginary is not really the word to properly describe the situation. But imaginary is the closest English equivalent, so keep that in mind as you analyze the story. So, to help the boat sail faster and more efficiently, the planet put imaginary captains at the helm of each. But then something surprising happened. And I think I'll leave it with you to ponder just what. Most homes cannot survive without door-to-door salesmen. A few cannot with them. Oh, honey, while you're up, would you stay up? And a man thought, phew, that's a lot to ask of someone, even if they are your honey. And I'm not even at all sure that most people are that lovingly close to their own mind. Huh, would you stay up indeed? And his thoughts agreed. Huh, indeed. Subsequent to his extensive research, one man came to the conclusion that the activities historically related to the attempt to comprehend the nature and purpose of existence is split into two major branches. One limb seems to believe that man at one time had such knowledge and has lost it, and the other branch seems to be claiming that he has never possessed it and should be actively searching for it. One day a guy got Life on the phone and asked, does it matter what I believe specifically? And Life replied, does it matter to you whether you go on living or not? And the guy figured he got the message. Well, one day, walking the tracks, a man began musing as to whether it was actually of any importance that we know where we're going as long as we continue headed there. One man decided the time had come for him to join the big leagues, but then couldn't decide which should be his farm team, his body, or his mind. Many's the player who's lost their shot at the checkers championship by being unable to make a move. I didn't say they blew it by making a wrong or untimely move, oh no, but by being unable to make a move. But this still being no attempted form of conversion, but rather exertions in objectivity, let's take immediate account of the fact that ordinary minds in response to this would reply that just making any move in a given situation is not necessarily preferable to making none at all, if the move made is not for certain the correct one. Okay, so we've given that predictable view a hearing. And if you're mentally alert enough to perceive its routine purpose, then you should be able to dismiss and see beyond it, and recognize what is intended here regarding being defeated by the game if you are unable to move because of your thinking about moving. One man joined the big leagues partially by realizing what his minor leagues were. Being unable to locate an already extant history of the term, one man came up with his own origins for the word mysticism. He now believes that it arose after the first man who became more conscious attempted to tell others about it. And while they were initially intrigued with the idea of it being possible, they found his descriptions of it far too mundane and pedestrian and decided to jazz it up. And don't be too quick to laugh, for everyone in some fashion relives such a chronicle themselves. A man who wanted to enlarge his residence kept hearing noises in his attic, his interest in which kept him from ever starting work. A boy asked his father if knowing what the problems are will assist one in overcoming them, and the elder asked the lad how it could be otherwise. And the boy replied that indeed it would seem impossible that it not be so, but pointed out that the everyday lives of everyday men seem yet a living denial of the fact, and his father turned his head and spat in the grass. In the ordinary sense of being mentally active, the more that you're inclined to think about life and what you do, the more that thinking seems important and necessary to what you do, regardless of whether it is or not. And now from our literary corner, this item. One man says that with all of his heart, for some reason, he has always dearly hated the proverb having to do with the squeaky wheel getting all the grease. He says it's hard to explain, but that some things are just bigger than we are. Plus, much smaller and less significant. Did he switch the subject back to thinking when we weren't watching? There was once a rich man who was born with 2 servants. One looked after his physical well-being and the other his mental. We are all born rich men. We all have at least one attendant about whose abilities we have an overblown, erroneous opinion. While no train can run without an engine, it can without a whistle or even an engineer. The viewer writes, listening to you of late makes me confused as to who or what I now hate the most. Doors? Door-to-door salesman? The house in which I was born? Or your show? At least I know how to handle one of these possibilities, now don't I? It's known as the off button on my remote. Yeah. Now if I just had one on my mind. Yeah. Yeah. Yours for now, etc., etc. After dying and hoping for the best, a man found himself face to face with life who said, I sure hope you're not expecting what I think you're expecting. Oh no, thought the man. A lad inquired of his dad, if we were actually some sort of fairly routine dumb animal, rather than the intelligent, insightful creature we know man to be, could we be so dumb that we wouldn't realize it? And his father replied, bah, moo. Meanwhile, later in his little life, the little lad became acquainted with the term a cheap shot and instantly recognized that his dear papa had never engaged in such. The kid loved a good laugh and a hearty surprise, all due to his own efforts subsequent to the old man's words. The boy would, in fact, often say to the 2 sides of his brain, it's good that we can have these conversations, while pretending that we're 2 separate people doing so. And 'tis good, in matter of double fact, that we can have them inasmuch as they are the only kind pertinent and profitable to the son of my father. One man says, sometimes I think that those who really get somewhere with this kind of activity would rather follow a course which they developed that doesn't work as well than to use one that someone else discovered which might work better. He also mentioned that he's glad he has no one to ask about this who might know. And lest anyone get too carried away by this musing, let me point out that the only substantial difference in all efforts to achieve that other state of consciousness is in their descriptions and terminology. All roads lead to Rhodes. It gets harder and harder the further you get away in time to milk any humor from the Greek era. One man offers. Maybe it wasn't a good century for metaphors. One man offers. Well, look on the upside. At least you're not as stupid as you could be. That is, if you thought you aren't. And his mind muttered, how many times am I going to have to warn you about that stuff? And since we're here again, and since I'm bound to truthfulness so far as is useful, let's elaborate on the last part of that item wherein the man's mind apparently took umbrage at something he had said regarding stupidity. Dig it? If, in some comparable manner, you could insult the body, it'd make you sick. Whereas if you attempt to insult the mind, all it can do is either laugh at the validity of the insult, or else shrug its shoulders and its seeming inability to comprehend what was said about it. And either instance should give cause for you to pause and ponder just what is afoot with the old brain when it comes to it hearing itself talked about. One man swallowed something that didn't agree with him. Then something that didn't agree with him swallowed him. Seemed like the same thing to me. Life, upon realizing that men would keep the race going merely on the physical basis of them finding almost anything that moved attractive, utilized a similar approach regarding the mind's attitude toward thinking. I could explain that in a more straightforward manner, but some people are easily offended. And once upon a time, some thoughts hanging around on a corner said, hey, we may be inexpensive, but we ain't cheap. It is truly impressive the number of ways by which whores can deny their profession. Or look at it this way. If man's mind weren't smarter than he is, where the hell would we be today? Yeah, think about that. Yeah. And do note that you hear no minds disagreeing. To one man, talk was sport. Nothing but sport. Do you understand me? Nothing but sport. On some worlds, if you're extremely mentally active, you kind of end up with two ways to go. Either eventually becoming bland and bored, or you get to be a jaded smartass. But one of the great things about being in this universe is that freedom of travel is not restricted. Unless you are. Local proverb update. I think, therefore I am immobile. I think. A good citizen went and sought the counsel of the great oracle. O mighty wise one, tell me, what else is there to say about man after you have said that he is mistaken? And even the great one was stumped by this one. Thinking of other states of awareness as being things of a mysterious, otherworldly nature is to foolishly believe that jumping ship is possible in a reality that is all ship. No matter how anxious a captive you be, all notions of freedom are quixotic if your attempted escape is from the wrong place. A few find being fanciful ill-appropriate for hogs and line at Hormel's. Making use of that hard-won and extracted from watching our program, one man now says to his mind whenever he can remember it, "So, that's what you think, is it?" To which his mind will normally reply, "Yes, it is." To which he will then respond, "Well, as it turns out, I don't care what you think." His present enjoyment of this is such that he says, "I'm now included in his will." And another man says, "There came a time when I didn't think I could stand to hear one more person talk about being more conscious. Then it got to where I couldn't hardly stand to hear anybody talking about anything. Now I got to tell you, it's to a place where I can't hardly stand to hear myself talking. God only knows what comes after this." Regarding the extremely complex connection between originality and death. You can't be original if you're dying. Consciousness and the ha-has. Ordinary minds can hear everyone else made fun of and laugh, and can, under certain circumstances, hear themselves so spoken of and muster a chuckle. But only those of liberated awareness recognize the total human thinking experience as an across-the-board humorous occurrence. Prejudicial humor is no humor at all. But then again, anything prefaced with the modifier prejudicial is not what it is. Go on, a father encouraged the son. Grow on up and be what you are without thinking about it. And although the lad at that time could not do so, as can no one initially when they first hear about it, he did remember the idea, and when the proper time became available, was able to make use thereof. Who's that knocking at the door? I don't care. Good, then you're the one, just the one to answer it. Unless the mind is taken into account, anything man observes is a waste of time. After hearing the term, a false sense of oneself, one man began repeating it over and over to himself, trying to fathom its deepest meaning, and came to the conclusion that a false sense of ourself is our thinking. One man says, once I fully realized that talk is nothing but words, I lost all interest. And finally, extreme travel news. If you're sick, you can't go anywhere. And don't tell me that's not fair. You aren't going anywhere anyway. Oh, all right, quit your whining and try this. Info regarding movement simplified. It's like you've got a choice. Either believe that you're in some way ill and must attend to the matter before thinking about any sort of travel, or else say, to hell with it, and hit the door running. If you allow the thinking that runs through your mind normally to go unchecked, to go unnoticed, strike unchecked, let's start off with that which is even possible. To go unnoted, then there are several consequences of this that form part of ordinary people's impression of themselves, which, I will point out, will not stand objective scrutiny. And even though I could either name 1 or 20 or 36, tonight I will, I'm going to see how many fingers I've, well, we'll just take a chance. However many fingers I've got, that's how many characteristics I'll point out. 4. If you allow the thinking that normally runs through you to continue unnoted, you will also permit the following. Things which seem real enough and constitute an average, ordinary man's sense of himself. You will permit them to stand, but at least parenthetically, I point out to you that they will not withstand any objective scrutiny. Now, going roughly in numerical order. Well, hey, I'm not a mathematician, so we'll start with that one. As you will take your thinking to be yours individually and uniquely, and you will believe that your thinking can be altered as needed. And compared to what you do, you will take thinking to be important. I should stop there, but I would have if it hadn't been for the 4-finger thing. It surprised even me. That's all I was prepared to go into. But I'll go ahead and list the other one since it turned out to be 4. You will take emotions to be a separate entity with a life of their own. Actually, the third one covers everything, but what the hell does that say? I guess it was apropos to have a moment of frivolity there and laughter, because think about it right quick from an ordinary view, from a sane person's view, looking at that, you would think, well, wait a minute, besides the handwriting, that is obviously the rantings of some sort of madman. To say that it's a picture of oneself that I've already said will not withstand scrutiny, so it's another way of saying it's an illusion, which I don't really, is not profitable saying. It's not really profitable thinking that way, even though you hear it used sometimes here to say that something is illusionary. We all know how that is intended when ordinary people say it. They say it's meant to be that you are individually deluded, that you have an incorrect impression. But see, when everyone entertains the same picture or illusion, then you are hard-pressed to call it an illusion in that sense. It is simply the aspects of the thinking process that people take as being a true statement of and a true description of the thinking process. Now I can put a period there, and in that case, all of any criticism. What I was representing by saying that an ordinary mind could look at that and ponder it for a second and say, well, that's crazy. From that view, it is crazy. It's insane, because if you do not carry it any further, then that which appears to be to the collective is. And all of this is apparently so. And I repeat, even though an ordinary mind might infer or profess that I am calling it illusionary, mistaken, when it is a collectively held illusion, it's really a misnomer to call it an illusion. But so I said what I intended to say for this conversation, that these are aspects that simply will not withstand any objective scrutiny. You cannot look at it and continue to believe this. That is safe enough, since very few people have the ability to look at it, even fewer still have any interest in looking at it. And even less than that, have any interest in looking at it and can hear someone point it out and go, so that's it. So, I'm not in danger of any great widespread criticism, since I have narrowed it down to actually an audience probably of less than 100 people on the planet. If you allow thinking to continue to run as it runs in you, and it does not matter how it runs in you, and I am addressing and using as a basis for this ordinary sane people by ordinary sane people standards. Whatever ordinary sane people would call ordinary sane thinking, I call it that too. I know when to respect my betters. I bow to the will of the majority. Like you got a choice, by the way, but it sounds good, makes you appear to be insightful, or at least humble. If you do not give it any objective scrutiny, then you take the thinking that runs through you as being yours individually and yours uniquely. If you do not give it any objective scrutiny, you believe that your thinking, as changes in circumstances would dictate to any intelligent man, you believe that your thinking can change to suit the shift in circumstances. This is at the heart of collective man's consciousness, sane, everyday man's consciousness. All models that man has of life, all pictures, all models that man conceive of as his personality, of his individuality, en masse and individually, are based. Well, if they don't see it based on these first two, they would see it this way. If lacking those first two, all of their models would crumble. Because you cannot be an individual unless your thinking is in some way individualistic. And you certainly cannot be an individual person capable of individual thinking if you have no ability to change your thinking when circumstances would demand it. Normally referred to in general as a kind of freedom of will, that if indeed we are limited, obviously, to certain physical freedoms, that we cannot fly and we cannot hold our breath underwater for 2 hours, but that in our thinking there is a freedom of will, or in the more simplistic realms of thinking, they include behavior, that in man's spiritual or moralistic life, that he has freedom of will, which is all saying the same thing. So without man accepting, without man, another way, put it this way, without man, if man do not question it at all, then this remains to be even an unspoken foundation of ordinary man's general model picture of themselves, collectively and individually. Of those first two is the basis. The third part could be more pregnant with possibility, because I know that you probably believe that you've heard the first two. The third part, there was a news item tonight, if I remember correctly, that went something like, I don't know whether it was an A flat or G, but it was something like, no, it wasn't like that. I believe it was an E flat. It went something like this, that the more mentally active you are, in the ordinary sense of those terms, the more mentally active you are, which is to say, the more you think about life and what you do, then the more important thinking seems to be to what you do. This is, when I say it's more pregnant with possibility, this is totally beyond any normal range of what a man would ever think about. The first two men are sometimes confronted with, not directly. They find themselves confronted with it normally on the basis of them having to defend themselves in some way. But men do not in any way go around with an attempted analyzation of what occurs within them in line with the first two characteristics. They do have some experience in it, in having to ward off assaults on behavior for which they feel condemnable. For talking one game and walking another one. That men have to always fall back on the devil made me do it. That is, they are experienced, without describing it this way, but they're experienced, very well experienced, and condemning one another. That, well, you said you'd do so-and-so, you promised, or you swore that that was your attitude toward life, and now just look at you. Which is attacking you on the basis that you had freedom. You damn well had freedom to do what you wanted to. You even said you were going to choose this course of action, and now look at you. And there you stand, you being every man, and you go, ooh. So you are experienced, without describing it that way, in the realities of the first two. But when I say that, suggesting there might be more possibility in the third description at least, the third view of it, is that men never think about this. It is, may I suggest, inconceivable that an ordinary mind would ever think of this. And that is, if you are mentally active, and this is very treacherous to try and literally describe, because it varies so much from person to person. And one man's mind, if it makes you feel better, is almost as unique as his fingerprints. Every time I say something like that to a crowd, I always notice that some people look very proud of themselves. And I've never had the heart to stop and say, oh, of what importance is it to you that your fingerprints are yours uniquely? Because I know the answer. It would be a heartbreaker, because anybody that seems to kind of perk up when I point that out, and you think, wait a minute, that's the only thing in life that you feel distinguishes you from everybody else. As well, by God, they don't have my fingerprint. Hey, listen, go with it. You got to dip with the one who danced with you first. If you are mentally alert and alive, and what I was going to say, it's on this planet now, you would say that everyone, well, if you can talk at any time, no matter what era we're discussing, if you talk, then you're mentally alive. But without any ability to make strict judgments, it's just a waste of time. I assume that everyone can recognize that from one part of this planet to another, from one part of your city to another, from one part of your nervous system to another, there is what I used to describe metaphorically as like the time zones, that although we can say that it's Monday all over North America right now, then it's 9 o'clock in New York, and yet it's still 4 o'clock in Los Angeles. That it's all just, that there's a full spectrum, but everybody is not marching to the same tempo. Everyone is not the same place in the parade. And so within people you know, within just your observation of society, you must see it, just whether you think about it this way, and you can't see it if you take this as criticism, or you can't see it if you look at it critically. You making some mental assault on somebody else's intelligence will not reveal anything. But it's simply this fact. You can look upon people, and you simply should be able to sense it. There's some people, and this is not either right or wrong, but there are some people who you can just look at, so to speak, and you know that what goes on in their mind, the so-called thinking, has a bigger effect on the way they live than somebody right next to them. I mean, it's not that hard to realize, and it displays itself when you get to extremes in behavior, the latter group being those at the edges of society. The criminal element is just the easiest way to point it out. There are those who seem less civilized, no matter, they could be living in the midst of a civilized area, in the midst of other civilized people, and yet they are obviously, everyone realizes it, they are less civilized, dangerous, not to be trusted. And I don't mean just on the basis of becoming their accountant and keeping their books. I mean that they are dangerous people. They think less about what they do than other people. And that's easy to see. It's just obvious if you have no moral or any sort of judgment involved. It's just a fact. Now back to the people, or back to my news item and what I'm trying to get to. The more you're mentally active, and that would normally be those who might ever hear such as this. It is at least the middle class of civilized humanity, the middle of the parade. And pushed a little bit, it'd be those toward the front of the parade. That would normally be people whose intellectual life is of more importance to them. Whether they think about it or not, it is simply more active, and they have more faith in it. They rely on it more. They refer to it more than do some other segments of society, some other proportion of humanity. They think more. They think more about life, and this is in no wise a compliment. This is no wise a sign of intelligence. They think more about life, though. Very redundantly, they don't know that. Very unoriginally, they don't know that because of the first two statements. But they do think more about what they do in life. Now, rather than talk about second and third parties, you should all be aware of this. You can think about what you do. And people believe, for instance, that if they are they're repairing a cabinet in their house, they're repairing a washer and a sink, and they're not a professional plumber, but they know more or less how to do it. And they decide the time has come and it's leaking enough, so they set aside a few minutes, they go in the garage and get their tools, or they go down the street and they make sure they got the proper washer and wrench, and they repair this. Kind of thing that's not a real brainstormer. But it's the kind of thing that if you don't normally do it, you would think, well, it takes some expertise, or it takes some ability to think in a rational manner, it takes some ability to follow through in a sequential line of effort, take something apart, put it back together properly after making the needed remedial changes. So you go and you repair the thing, and you put aside and you knew that you had to hurry, let's say, because you had to be somewhere at a certain time. So you know that it took you at least 45 minutes to do it. And if you're interested in such as this, and you're trying to make some continuing observation of your own thinking, own state of consciousness, it is a fact. All you got to do is look, and I don't have to continue preaching. You can go and repair that faucet. Or for those of you of very wide mind, you can go and do brain surgery if you're a trained neurologist. You can do brain surgery or repair a faucet and come out of it, and your awareness was somewhere else. Your awareness was minimal. I'm speaking intellectual awareness. Because of the fact that if you have any idea what this is all about, you know that you are not conscious of you being conscious throughout the procedure. You might not have been conscious of your consciousness for a moment, and yet you performed a death-defying piece of work on somebody's brain, or else you repaired a faucet. There's no, for the point of what we're talking about, it makes no difference. That you came out of it, and if you could see, and was interested in what I'm talking about, you can see for yourself. It's not an attack, it's not a criticism. Again, it's a simple statement of fact that you did this, and the participation of your mind, and the brain surgeon, of course, is obvious. He's had years of experience, and as I said, with a faucet, you'd have to have a little experience, at least be physically adroit enough that you don't hurt yourself when you try to pick your nose or knock yourself out when you comb your eyebrows. In either case, if you could see, if you're interested in what I'm talking about, you know without any question. Oh, those of you who know anything know this all too well. You know it disturbingly well. You know it ludicrously well. You know it frighteningly well, that yes, I can do such things. And as far as saying I was mentally conscious and aware of what I was doing, God, that's stretching those terms. And that's being charitable. The fact is, you can go and do almost all of your life if you observe. Rather than kid around about it, I just state it, and anybody who's interested, again, it's one of these things, all you've got to do is observe it. It doesn't prove that I'm true, it just proves it's a fact. And it also shows that you would not normally investigate this matter, because for one thing, it will not withstand objective scrutiny, which would put the average intellectual, educated person, may I put it this way, severely off their feed. Yes, I will put it that way. Seeing as how it's not going to matter much to the average person, how I put it. You can see without any effort, momentarily. It takes a lifelong of effort to see it long enough for it to have a lasting impact. But it can be seen that notwithstanding the fact that everything in collective life, everything at the same collective level of human existence says, points to, seems to support, otherwise, you can look and see that you can live as you now live with almost no mental attention given to what you do. That certainly cannot be proven, and again, I can take the other view, and we all know that you can hear that statement or look at that, but that one statement would be enough to dismiss all this. To say, wait a minute, you're including modern us, modern, intelligent, sophisticated, in the midst of complex civilization people, and you're saying that you operate and you exist quite well with just almost nothing resembling what could be, or what you know to be. Instant, conscious attention. It's a fact. You can live. Now, you could not live under ordinary conditions. You could not live as a human, as a matter of fact, but it might make it easier to verbally outline. You could not live under modern conditions without being, as they call it, conscious. You simply could not. So we'll give you that. But the idea that people have that what I think, what's going on in my mind continually is important, that is important to what I'm doing in life, how I get by, how I operate, my degree of success, the extent to which I just survive is important, will not withstand any objective scrutiny. That's any such as in none. And the truth of it is with a person constantly. But the more you think that you think personally, the more that you think that you're thinking about what you do, and if you're ordinary, educated, sophisticated, hip with it, urbane, and all that other stuff, then you believe, even without talking to yourself about it. If you're questioned, if the subject is brought up, you certainly respond in a positive manner, which is to say you believe that you constantly are thinking about what you're doing in life. You're constantly thinking about mistakes you've made. You're analyzing your past missteps. You're plotting your future based upon your rational interpretation and analyzation of past experience. That you are constantly being aware and checking, like some sort of homostat, some kind of feedback mechanism on a very complex piece of intellectually based machinery that you're constantly feeding back about, well, if I'm going to fix this washer, if I'm going to cut out this tumor right here at the man's antipodal lobe, I've got to be careful that I am watching, that you have to do a lot by feel. Oh, yes, you do. You have to do all this stuff. You got to turn that wrench. And you think, and the mind, people will tell you that you're constantly engaged in a process of feedback, knowing what kind of torque to put on the man's brain or that washer. How much torque to put on a relationship? How far can I push that girl? How much will she take? How much can I fool that guy? How much can I fool the IRS? It's always how pushy you can be in line when you're wanting to be waited on. Hey, I was here first. Another guy goes, the hell you were, and you think, I guess you got something. All right. It's a constant process. It's a constant that you're having to take feedback and adjust what you do to change, to meet the changes of circumstance. As we say in neurology, or we used to before they stopped this bullshit. Plumbers can still say that. Neurologists, they go, no, don't say that. It's ludicrous, in a sense. Of course, it's eye-opening for those who have an interest in something other than running through the general bland gamut of 60 or 70 years being trapped with this thing that seems to be so alert, so capable of originality and insight. It's like this thing, I can't resist trying to come up with a on-the-spot metaphor. Our mind deserves it. Our mind deserves, if not the best, a continuing onslaught of such metaphors. I was going to say the mind is almost, let's take it from a sexual male view, you can all do your own humor. Your mind is it's like this closet that you've never opened, but from inside, the closet tells you that in there, it says that inside the closet is the world's best looking naked woman, and she's a nymphomaniac, and her father owns a liquor store and all that good stuff. And it's in your head, and you accept. I mean, why would it lie to you? I mean, there it is. All you got to do is open the door, and you'd know otherwise, right? So why? It's got no basis to lie to you, because all you got to do is open the door, and you'll know the truth. Except you live with it 70 years and never open the door. Well, why would my mind lie to me? Well, I can put it better than that. People listen to this and go, wait a minute, why should I listen to you instead of my mind? Hey, you got me there. It is, but there are two ways to look at it, assuming that I'm giving you a valid description, and many of you already know the validity of it. But if an ordinary person were to take what I'm saying as being a genuine description of fact, and they were to try and take what steps were necessary for them to see the truth of this, if there be such to it, then what would it do to them that their whole life, even on a non-stated basis, the whole life, the more intelligent from the ordinary view, the more educated, the more sophisticated that you are, the more you think, the more you accept, whether you say it or not, that thinking is of great importance. I mean, it is a completely tracking ratio, that the further you get in the line amongst ordinary men, and it normally ties into everything else, socioeconomic, everything. The better dressed, the better educated, the more money, the more successful, just the better they seem to get along in life. Right today. It's always been such, but today it may seem to be even more so. But the more that they are in the front ranks, just in the ordinary sense of success, fair, reasonable happiness with life, just everything, then the more they would say, if asked, the more importance that they would say their thinking has on their life. And it is absolutely defensible. Just on the surface, it seems to be unassailable that they say, I would not be here. Look at my profession. I think for a living. I am an inventor. I am a programmer. I am a college instructor. I'm an attorney, an accountant. I think for a living. Thinking is of supreme importance. My life would not be anything like it is were it not for my individual thinking process. It absolutely, at that level, is unassailable. And yet again, it is absolutely unable to withstand objective scrutiny. Because what ordinary people call their individual thinking is no such thing. What they call their thinking can be brought down to, or can be seen to be operating at a minuscule. All of this is just somewhat meaningless and irrelevant for me to put modifiers and say minuscule, very small, of almost no significance. You either see what it is or you don't. Your brain is obviously firing. It is operational, or you wouldn't be listening to this. You couldn't listen to it. And so in one sense, your mind and your thinking are inseparable parts of you. You would not be you without this thing continuing to run. But for you to believe, for you to accept that what is going on in your mind, the thinking, is of any importance, is of significance importance, is of substantial importance, of some importance to what you do, simply says one thing, that you have never investigated it. You have never turned a cold eye on it. Because what you do, compared to what you do, thinking is almost of no significance. And it does not matter that you are a thinker for a living. I don't know how much further to carry it on a public tape to make it sound insane, irrational, and Martha turned on another station. I don't know why we should listen to that crap. As I said, there are at least two views. One would be an ordinary person's view, that if they could follow through with that, it would be, it would shake, to be dramatic, it would shake the foundations of their personality. It would shake the foundations of their thought processes, but all is safe and well since it will not happen, but it would. So they can't see it, they're not going to see it, they have no interest in seeing it. From another view, if you do, if you're wired up to be interested in such as this, then once you see that, not just once or twice, but once it becomes a sight from which you cannot pull your eyes, that it is always lurking there, the reality of it, it is, shall I say, yes I shall, it is somewhat liberating. Think how it would be to have far less faith in you than you now have, which on the surface again sounds verging on the psychotic, I guess. But how about this? If you had less faith in who you are, think about this. You would have almost no condemnation, no feelings of guilt of who you are. In other words, all these, the small-time childish attempts for religious people to be caught up short and go, uh-oh, ooh, you're right. And I wouldn't have done that, but obviously the devil made me do it. Think about the liberating effect to realize I am the devil. Metaphorically speaking, that you realize no devil made me do this. Being alive made me do this. Being alive has made me be me. And then you go, oh, see, it's just one step from that to, wait a minute, being alive has made me believe that this is me. So as always, life has arranged things in such a plucky and fair manner that you can hear such as this for whatever accidental reason. You could hear such as this and be able to absolutely reject it. Sanely, rationally so, and if you can, I can help you. You know I do it constantly. I can take the other view and point right out that, well, this is just nuts. That life has, in its fanciful